Okay, good afternoon, everyone.
Aha. We dey thank you, Papa.
I guess I'm fine now. Good afternoon. Can you can you all hear me?
Hi, Uche. Yes, we can.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. My
Good
name is
afternoon.
my name is Uche, and I'm glad to welcome all of you to this session. This next session of the broadband conversation by StartupSouth. We have a stellar cast of accomplished ladies, professionals in their own right and in their field. We'll be having conversations today around the digital economy, Africa's emerging digital economy, and we will be discussing, the opportunities. I don't mean to take a lot of your time because I know that the moderator and the speakers are going to do justice to this topic. But let me just quickly just do a couple of you know introductions. So I would start by just introducing who we are and why we do what we do. Startup South is it's basically an entrepreneurship ecosystem development project, and we believe in the power of entrepreneurship. So why are we doing the broadband conversation? Because without broadband, a lot of the things we are trying to do will not work. So we felt it was necessary to advocate for broadband, especially in the region where we're focused, where our project is focused. But the truth is, all of Africa is it's our goal. So what affects one affects the other. So typically, this is why we're doing the broadband conversation. You can check more about us on our website, startupsouth.org. Um, I'm just going to very quickly run through the panelists we have today. Eleanor Sarpong is the Deputy Director and Policy Lead at Alliance for Affordable Internet, which is a part of the World Wide Web Foundation or the Web Foundation. You can check them out on you can search them out on Google, but I'm sure that the slide that will share later, all of these profiles will be on those slides. And so Mavis is the CEO of Stinsad Consult and former regional coordinator for Africa and lead IT policy specialist at the World Bank. Jane Egerton-Idehen is a country manager, Nigeria, and the regional sales manager, West Africa at Avanti Communications PLC. And then Karen Airola is Africa Director for Corporate Innovation Partnerships at Plug and Play Tech Center, Sunnyvale, California. And our moderator is Adia Sowho. She's a venture builder and operator. Adia has her background is in telecommunication and fintech. You'll find, I'm sure they will talk a lot more about themselves. But because I don't want to waste a lot of our time, I'm going to call up on Adia in a few minutes. But just let me say thank you to the companies that are supporting us to make this possible. Signal Alliance, Zip.com.ng, Veraki Partners, and TechEconomy.ng. Thank you, guys. Adia, I'm going to just hand over this session to you at this time. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Uche. Thanks for having me. The digital economy is a subject that I'm very passionate about, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss it with these very accomplished ladies that you amassed for me here. So much talent. Okay, so I'd like to start off by introducing myself. So as Uche said, I've got a background in the sector, about 20 years across a bunch of different areas in technology, mostly mobile. So telcos in Africa are a proxy to the internet. They're the link to the internet, and inevitably they are part and parcel of the infrastructure upon which a digital economy is built. And I definitely have perspective both from the telco side and also from the startup side, having built a startup on top of this telco infrastructure. But I'd like to start off by introducing my panelists, who will probably just run through highlights of their background. Uche, could I just get control of the screen, please? Who will run through their backgrounds as well as their passion points and specifically things that they would want to touch on as we go through this presentation. And to do that, I'd like to kick off with Mavis. Hi, Mavis.
Hi, Adia, how are you? Sorry, I had to turn on unmute. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can. You can actually hit present. I know you tried to do full screen. You can hit present and so that we can see only the slide you want to show.
Sure, no problem. We'll do that.
That's present at the top.
No problem, no problem. Hi, Mavis. Sorry about that.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Okay, please go ahead. Please tell us a little bit about your background and what you specifically like to talk about today.
So again, thanks a lot for inviting me. This is a really interesting conversation, and I'd just like to echo the impressive team that you've gathered to discuss this. My background is really in public policy and development economics, and I got into the telecom sector I would say mid-90s when I returned to Ghana to join the bank, World Bank in Ghana, and had the opportunity to work on public sector reforms. And it was very interesting. One thing that kept coming up was telecom, the Ghana telecom at the time, the inefficiency of it. And in every paper that you could get your hands on, you saw that the headline was Manhattan had more phones than all of Africa. And it really was something that bothered me a lot. And so when I had the chance to work to privatize Ghana Telecom, I just jumped on it. It was just really, and I saw the impact of it. Fast forward, I had the opportunity to replicate in a number of countries and to support just sector development, including in Nigeria, where we assisted the NCC creation and strengthening of the regulatory institution. I have, since then, I joined the bank in DC again, just focusing on what are the pain points to connectivity in Africa, where the opportunities are, where the challenges are. In my last assignment, it was really looking at the international connectivity, where we thought that was one of the biggest challenges in Africa. And I think the record is clear that bringing the submarine cables to a number of African countries has really transformed connectivity on the continent. That said, there's a lot of challenges remaining. Connectivity is only one part of the digital economy story. But now I have the opportunity to work with the bank. I've left the bank. I left the bank a couple of years ago, and I have the opportunity now to support the teams to look at the broader issues of digital economy, how digital connectivity, actually the role that it plays in it, but also how other platforms, other foundational pillars also play a role, and I'm sure we'll get into it. I'm really excited because the opportunity is immense. That's why we're all here. I'll stop here, and then perhaps when we get into specific issues, I can address that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mavis. Looking forward to getting into sort of the strategic hows to, in terms of activating a digital economy with you in a little bit. But I'd like to switch gears to another friend of ours in the policy space, Eleanor. Hi, Eleanor.
Hi, Adia. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, so very much like Mavis, my background is also in the telecom space. I right after my MBA in 2008, I accidentally ended up in the telecom sector. It was a choice between the oil and gas and the telecoms, and I had a very good mentor who got me interested in the telecom sector. So I came to Ghana at the time that MTN had just entered the market, and was now going to start 3G services. So I started the regulatory unit, policy regulatory unit, and saw through quite a lot of work with MTN in getting all the licensing and the regulations that we needed to comply with in order to make sure that we were doing very well in the number one in Ghana. And also saw the advent of mobile money, and then all the regulations that had to go with it. As a pioneer in that space, it was a really interesting time for us because it was a very novel idea, and we had to really win quite a lot of regulatory authorities, not just from the ICT side, but also from the central bank and from the financial sector as well, in order to understand what we're coming up with and what the potential for that space could be. And fast forward to today, you see mobile money is very pervasive all around, and it's a key part of the digital economy as well. So I'm very excited to see that. Moving on from MTN, I've done some consulting work, and I'm currently with the Alliance for Affordable Internet, and I've been a chief advocate for affordable internet for the past 3.5 years. And for me, it's a real, it's the basic foundation for any digital economy. You need to have affordable internet, and not just affordable internet. It has to also come with meaningful connectivity, which I'm going to dive deeper in. But if you're going to have a digital economy, you have to have a kind of connectivity that's going to ensure that people can connect with adequate devices. So it means that at basic minimum, you're looking at a smartphone device. They should be able to connect very frequently. They should also be able to connect with very fast speeds, so at least 4G type speeds. And they should be able to connect at any part of, have unlimited data to be able to develop develop the potential that they see in the space. So meaningful connectivity, we are setting the bar. That is one thing that I'm very, very passionate about. And I'm also very passionate about the digital gender divide because, Adia, we cannot develop a digital economy when we have so many women who cannot access the internet, who cannot afford the internet, and who are being left behind. So you'll hear a lot about this in my conversations as we go along, but definitely if there are two things you're going to leave with this from this conversation, it's going to be about meaningful connectivity and about closing the digital gender divide, particularly in Africa. And I'm sure there's a lot more we'll be talking about, so I didn't want to get too cozy. Thank you.
Okay, no issues. I mean, I love some of the things you mentioned, right? I mean, that bar you've set, it's not high at all, as we say ironically in Nigeria. All you need is a 4G continent-wide, smartphones and unlimited data bar. I hope everybody...
For everybody, yes. And then and frequency of connection as well. And this is a minimum. This is like the bottom, right? So this is just the minimum threshold, because for some countries or for some spaces and for different segments of people, the bar is going to be very different. But this is the minimum for the person who is coming out, who is pushing the truck on the street, or the market woman. That is the kind of minimum thresholds that we are advocating for if we want to have a digital economy that is very meaningful in Africa.
Yeah, I totally don't disagree with you. I mean, I have a hypothesis that in the absence of the physical infrastructure that developed markets have spent centuries building, what's left for us to build is digital. So, I mean, having that as a bar actually creates the right foundation for us to build the economies in the way that they should. So I'm in total agreement. Okay, so just switching gears now to introduce another one of our panelists. Hi, Karen.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. Quick introduction on myself. I actually work for a venture capital firm called Plug and Play, early investor in startups such as PayPal, Google Lending Club, Dropbox, and about 1,000 others. So we've really organically grown from, just having a Silicon Valley office to doing it across 36 offices around the world. We have a network of over 25,000 startups and partner with over 400 corporates. So, one of the things that we have seen a lot over our time during investing, but also during, building this ecosystem is the importance of collaboration. And I think collaboration happens not only when we look at the public and the private sector, but also with corporates and startups. And with the topic of the broadband, I think that it's kind of that next layer that's going to be really important to developing the economy.
Fantastic. Thanks, Karen. We'll talk a little bit more about Plug and Play's growing interest in innovation in Africa through the presentation.
Yes, thank you.
And last but most certainly not least, hi, Jane. No, not yet. Please unmute.
I was talking to myself. Hi guys. Okay, let me recap who I am, or the introduction with a story. So, 7 years ago, I was running Ericsson's operations. I was working for Ericsson operations in West Africa because I had done across West Africa. Then it was in Ghana. We deployed the mobile money platform for this, the largest operator there. That was MTN. Now, what I would like to say that in 2018, MTN will launch an IPO to raise about $280 million. 85% of that IPO was subscribed using mobile money. That means your uncle in the village, your grandmother, everybody could subscribe. I think that's one of the importance of digital economy. But more importantly, affordable quality broadband, which is just speaking to what Eleanor was saying. If we have to get, broadband, it just doesn't have to be affordable. It should be inclusive beyond the cities, in the rural areas. And that's one of the things I'm really passionate about, especially with the company I currently work for, Avanti, which is a satellite company, is to ensure that we have broadband for everyone and it's inclusive. It's not just affordable and quality, but we want it even in the remote areas, in the rural areas, because we know that that's how we will trigger digital economy from all sectors, not just to the same areas and sections we've known about. So that's a quick introduction.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jane. That's fantastic. Okay. So I wanted to switch gears now. I mean, I've got a few slides that I wanted to use to seed the conversation. So I wanted to talk about, before I start getting into the core infrastructure required, sometimes macroeconomic activity itself can drive the digital economy. If you look at this cross-section of commercial property rent per square meter, and of course, Nigeria is bringing in the unfortunate lead. These are the things that make people start businesses outside in the digital sphere, right? So if we can't control the price of real estate, make a business that is virtual. And of course, in times like this, when we don't plan for global pandemics, we also see something like that, conditions like that, assisting the creation of a digital economy. Now, Africa's total digital economy is supposed to be 300 billion by the year 2025, which is starting to rival in size, the largest economies on the continent. So 300 billion starts to get you, more than 50% of the way past GDPs of Nigeria and South Africa. And I would hazard a guess that digital economies grow a lot faster. So, I mean, I feel like digital economy is one of those phrases that you hear thrown around, but I wanted to break it down a little bit to try to enhance our understanding. So there are every sector can have a digital component. And as you can see here, this is an excerpt from the Nigerian Digital Economy Diagnostic Report drafted by the World Bank. I have a reference link to it in this presentation, and the presentation will be made available to attendees after this. So you'll get this link and links to the report. But what I wanted to highlight here is that look at the cross-section of industries: transport, energy, agriculture, even culture and entertainment, healthcare, right? All of these have a digital component, but they won't exist without some of the foundational requirements that we're going to be talking about today, right? So as you notice on this call, we have people representing different areas of the stakeholder map. You have policy creators, policy strategists, you have actors that are actually trying to deliver internet as far as possible, and you have investors, right? And then if you count myself, I'm also an actor within the ecosystem because I create and scale digital businesses. So we're all here, and this is a fairly representative room, and we really want to try and tease out the issues in today's conversation. All right, so going back to the things that make up a critical foundation for digital economy success, I want to go back to Eleanor and Mavis. Would you be able to share some success stories in your experience that have been recorded from proper development of any of these 5 pillars? Please pick whichever one suits your story.
Hi, yeah. So, Adia, as when we were having the conversation yesterday, one of the things that I kept talking about is that in order for us to build to get the foundations right, getting a digital infrastructure is going to be very critical. Mm-hmm. And for me, in the policy space, having a very robust national broadband policy that speaks to the issues of infrastructure, also speaks to the issues of getting the right type of spectrum, getting the right milestones and targets, and also being able to ensure that it is you're able to bring a lot more people online in a very affordable and meaningful way is very critical. And I really like the process that your country, Nigeria, has taken in the national broadband plan that they've just developed recently. The process to doing that has been very inclusive and involved a lot of stakeholders. But what is very important is the fact that they are looking at critically milestones that are going to ensure that infrastructure is pervasive across the country. One of the key bottlenecks that we had discovered in the previous broadband plan from 2012 to 2018 was the issue of rights of way. Very expensive, arbitrary rates across various states in order to lay cables in the middle mile to even the last mile. And you see that in Nigeria, for instance, there's a lot of capacity in Lagos. You have a lot of submarine cables. There are more submarine cables that are coming into Africa. But the biggest problem has been how to move it from the shore into the hinterland and into various into the doorstep of people. And rights of way charges has been one of the biggest bottlenecks we've seen. So I'm very happy to see that through a lot of engagement and advocacy, you're seeing that states are reversing these high rates. We've seen as much as 96% slash in rights of way rates, which is very, very important because this is something that can inure to the benefits of not just the companies that are laying cable, but also to the consumers in the long run. And could also go to feed into how to reach affordable internet for quite a lot of consumers. So for me, I'm not looking for I'm looking for the nuggets. And for me, one of the key nuggets I've seen is this slashing of right of way from across the various state levels, which can also lead to cheaper way of building the infrastructure that is needed for the digital economy. But I believe that as we go along, we would see a lot more coming through in the various countries as well.
Okay. So speaking of success, and thresholds, I mean, when we, across Africa and all of these development programs, we usually set seemingly high bars. Are these goals actually achievable? I mean, Mavis, if I may just switch to you, when you go about creating strategic plans to meet these goals, is the point to actually meet the goal, or to use that as inspiration for all of the stakeholders to act towards meeting the goal? What are your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Adia. I think it's really important to unpack these goals. And if we look at digital infrastructure, for instance, it's a fairly comprehensive sector or pillar. So digital infrastructure, to get to the 2%, to the less than 2% of DNI per capita, it involves actual connectivity. And a lot of times we talk about the high-speed internet, the affordable broadband. It also involves a lot of actors, the IXPs, their role in making sure that content is local, reducing the cost of broadband. Some of the activities that are involved in the digital infrastructure include Internet of Things, the mobile devices, the cost, bringing down the cost of mobile devices, computers, sensors, etc. It also involves developing the data depositories like data centers, clouds. It's really packed, and it really involves looking at every sub-component of it in order to get to this objective. You have the active and passive infrastructure, the sites, the mass. Again, coming back to the specific case of Nigeria, there's a lot of push, thanks to the A4AI, for infrastructure sharing on the masts, on the towers, the effective use of spectrum. Again, it's just a very broad sector, and it's not only just the target. It's just looking at what are the various activities and challenges and opportunities that contribute to the target. So all of these contribute, I would say, for the digital economy, for infrastructure, for instance, all of these contribute. And then across all the sectors, you will realize from the bank, probably in one of your slides, is also looking at even what is described in digital infrastructure as an invincible mile, but also in some cases referred to as the cross-cutting issues. It's with the competitiveness of the sector, the tax issues, I'm sure we'll go into it, the use of the universal service. So it's really having a very comprehensive program that will result in these targets. So the targets, again, just to go back to the issue of, you need to unpack what is involved in the targets and what will make any particular country able to achieve these targets.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, so just switching gears a little bit now and getting into the actual industries and platforms that can be established, and support the digital ecosystem. I wanted to switch gears to the more commercially oriented people on the panel, Karen and Jane. Can you just share your thoughts and insights on success stories and where your particular experience comes into that?
Yeah, I can start a little bit and then Jane jump in. But one of the things when I was first kind of looking at this slide is, as you know, innovation really touches every sector. And I think one of the things that we're seeing globally is that all of the different industries are becoming a little bit more fluid, and something that may affect one is going to affect or benefit another one. And so kind of having that insight is really important. I also, kind of looking at this, see the importance of really increasing that demand side, because when we look at the ability to innovate, not only is it good for the corporates, but it's good for the startups. It's good for the whole economy in general. So it's really a win-win-win for everyone involved.
Okay, so if I continue if you look at this graph, you notice that some sectors seem to have gotten a higher value than others. And if you notice, those sectors probably are likely driven a lot by the private sector, like the retail and wholesale, professional services. When we come to sectors where it's mostly driven by the government, you see a slow growth, agriculture. But we know that the way the sectors are growing and industries are growing, we talk about internet farming, the fourth industrial revolution, the lines will be blurred. So it makes a case that if we really want to evolve as Africa, we've gone and we put this plan together for, universal available affordable broadband, hoping that by 2030, we can have about 1 billion new users. But we cannot do that without making extra effort for a push. I think for a long time, we've let the private sector drive that. But now we need more than just the private sector. If you want to see a change in education, it's going to be more than the private sector. Just a good example of what happened during this COVID-19. So if you speak to Nigeria, I think apart from those living in Lagos and maybe Abuja, there were very few students that could study or school online once we went into a lockdown. And that's a huge gap in that sector. 80% of students are still outside the cities. But when we don't have broadband infrastructure, there's a debt of broadband infrastructure, you can't bring those people online. So you can think about it. That is just a gap that's telling us there's work to be done. And I'm not saying it's only for the government. Of course, it's going to be private and public partnership, because the issues are just beyond, put the funding there. We need expertise. We need solution. We need policy that is enabling. That's one of the big challenges we've had in West Africa. All of a sudden, there was a trigger and everybody was finding every operator at will. Once we continue to do that, the private sector will shy away from investing. If the policies are not enabling, like what Eleanor speaks to, if right of way becomes an issue, I know we're celebrating it, it's what's celebrated. We've got 10 states out of 36. We need more. We just don't need more. We need to also move at a faster pace. So those plans we put together, the digital economy, the broadband plan, we should make them flexible enough to adapt. That's what COVID is telling us. It's telling us we have to adapt. We have to move faster. We can't be waiting for 2020, 2022, 2023. We need to move faster in some of those plans we put together on paper. So that's just one way to look at it.
Fantastic. So speaking of the government, one of the things that I wanted to put a quick spotlight on here is how government services, which are supposed to serve the entire population, are a gateway to, one, creating opportunity, driving culture towards socialization around the digital economy, and even the skill set. So I wanted to just flip from here, we can see it's growing, but like you said, Jane, it's not growing fast enough. But government can do some very, very simple things. I mean, COVID communication in Nigeria, for instance, I get a text message from the NCDC every day. I'm not sure if I'm the only one in Nigeria that does that, but you get those texts, right? So there are very simple community management announcements, right, that can shift to tech. I've started to see board meetings, government meetings happening using technological platforms. But it took a pandemic for that to happen, right? But think about how much money has been saved, right? Instead of traveling up and down for a 30-minute meeting in Abuja, you have the 30-minute meeting at an appointed time on Zoom. But I wanted to just switch quickly to just take a quick look at the skill set here, right? And if we just even look at this list by number, there is a disproportionate number of these skills that are categorized as basic. You don't need to have a PhD to participate in the digital economy, right? So that when you Jane, in your work with providing satellite to rural areas, you don't need to be doing machine learning in my village Kokori in order for that to be relevant to you. But I wanted to open this back up to my panelists here, so that we can talk about these skill sets. Are they prevalent enough? What is happening? How do we socialize people around finding and attaching themselves to skill sets, that align with them, so that they too can find the opportunity in the digital economy?
Yeah, one thing I want to, this kind of brought to mind is that, we all know that sometimes perception is as strong or stronger than reality. And, when looking at the government and the e-services and accessing and all of that, one of the important reasons to kind of focus on that is just to send the message that, that technology and innovation is important. It's going to be around, and kind of sending that signal to the private market so that they can continue building upon that. So, sometimes we say, why do we need things like that? I'm fine doing the paperwork, but it's almost just sending that signal that's going to create that ripple effect. That's really important. And that has to do with, many of these other skills.
Did any of my panelists on it? Eleanor, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, just adding to what Karen is saying. And, when I looked at the slide, what struck me was when I saw the computer literacy as basic skills, and I looked at what you needed, smartphone, tablet, computer, I just came back to what I was saying about the minimum threshold. Making sure that people have the appropriate devices. The cost of devices on the continent is really prohibitive for a lot of people. And so you find out that smartphone penetration is not as you would expect it to be. There are a lot of people still using feature phones, which are phones that you cannot be using in a digital economy if you really want to participate meaningfully. And so that is one area where I feel that private sector players have been doing that because there's a profit motive for them. But I think that there should be a holistic way of looking at it, even from the government side. Another thing that struck me is on the issue of creating and sharing content. There is quite a lot of content that is out there, but is it relevant to the people who want to use it? And back to the issue about the digital gender divide, that you have women, we had a research that was done, it needs a bit of updating, but at the time we did it, we realized that 50% of women were less likely to come online. And when they come online, 30 to another over 30% were also least likely to use the internet as in a very meaningful way. So what we are expecting is that if we really want people to acquire the basic skills, we need to co-create. So the kind of content that we have there should be one that's created with the people who are going to consume the content. And for women in particular, who form a large percentage of the informal economy, that kind of content needs to be one that they can see, they can use, and it's in a format that they can easily use, such as a voice-enabled or video-enabled. And then that goes back to the meaningful connectivity standard again, having a 4G type connectivity that will be able to enhance the kind of experience that they need. So when I talked about raising the bar, it's actually, as you see, it's just really where we should be starting from. But I would just like to hear from the rest of my colleagues on this one.
Let me speak to what
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Because I wanted to say that, basic skills, there are two ways to do it. You could do top down, which is, I think, what we focus a lot in our plan. They're talking about all these agencies that have to go out there trying to train people on digital skills, but there's also bottom up. So I'll tell you a story. So there was a time, the same operator I'm talking about in Ghana, we were trying to push content. So we did this, mobile TV. And, it was difficult to get uptake. I don't know how somebody came with this ingenious idea of actually localizing the content. So we took sometimes foreign content and localized it. So the voiceover for those Venezuelan movies was done in the local Twi language. And we saw a huge uptake, even to the rural areas, even to the taxi driver in the park, the butcher that sells meat in the market. He just spend a little time when he's free watching these things. And there was a huge uptake. And that's a bottom-up approach. Because we worried, would they have the phones? Would they afford the data? But we saw them as soon as there was clearly a demand that is relevant to the audience themselves acquired what they required to move up. So that's another way to do it bottom down, because especially look at the plan for Nigeria. We set all these targets, all these MDs, we want them to go and do digital skill training. If people don't see the relevance, like what Eleanor was saying, they don't take it. You can come and train me on Google, but if I don't understand, what am I going to use Google Suite for? You haven't told this trader in the village what she's going to be doing with downloading apps. Unless you give her an app that is relevant to what she's doing, then she will download the app and she'll make effort to try and understand it.
Yeah, I agree completely. For instance, if I make a personal example, My father carries at least 2 smartphones and has done so for the last 10 years. But he didn't use WhatsApp until he had to watch videos of his granddaughter. He had no interest in it. So I would agree with you that there's something about us in these parts that make us very keen to understand the value proposition extremely clearly before we opt into a service. This is actually, it's a much stronger imperative I found in emerging markets than it is in developed markets, which fundamentally affects how you approach product design. Forgive me, I'm participating in the panel a little bit.
Okay.
I'm very passionate about this subject, right? Because content itself, you know, if you look at it as 2 things, on one hand, it's entertainment, which must be localized. But even within a product and a service, you have to, first of all, consider, you know, the person's access level, the person's literacy level, the person's sophistication, right? And I know that it's possible. So Eleanor, to your point, the last company that I worked for delivered credit, cash-based credit on an instant basis, right? We you know, 4 years into the business, 4 million loans in, we had not developed an app. It's still in the roadmap somewhere. But we were able to do 4 million loans and touch more people than any other financial institution in Nigeria because, you know, we built on USSD, which is readily available across the country. Right? So I think that was also part of the localization effort, right? It's understanding where the people are and constructing a product that is simple enough for it to make sense to them, because nobody has time for product manuals anymore. You really can't build a product and expect somebody to go read a set of instructions. So the product has to teach you as you go along. So these are things that need to start finding their way into the product design for emerging markets. And I actually think developed markets are still going to, you know, go this way eventually, right? They'll probably just do that a little bit later. Products need to really, really be simplified, and that's part of the localization. So staying on government for a second,
So if I can just, Adia, if I can just add a little bit to the skills.
Okay. Yes, please.
Yes. So I think beyond the list, I think what we need to look at is, do we have a digitally competent, digitally literate citizens and a digitally competent workforce? And I think those are 2 key issues that we need to look at, that in terms of participating in the digital economy. What are the skill sets that allows the citizen to be literate, to be able to use technology to improve their lives, and also to be able to contribute to as part of the workforce. And I see a number of areas that you know, could be improved. One is that there's very limited broadband in schools, and I think we've all mentioned that COVID has really exposed the inefficiencies in our system. We have a lot of schools all schools are out, and it's only the rich schools that are able to continue learning because they have broadband and they can continue. But I would hazard a guess that 95% of African students are at home not doing anything.
Yeah.
So it's really critical. But even before COVID, I think there was very limited use of technology in teaching methods. I walk around Accra. I walk just beyond a little bit Accra. You see blackboards, which I'm sure you've all forgotten how they're used, of kids being taught with blackboards. And when it's erased, the content is gone. It's really critical that we digitize content. So how do we do it? It's obviously costly. There's a very large gap between institutional and policy environment. The policies are being made. Actual institutions are not seeing any benefit. So we need to really bridge that gap. But finally, and by no means the least point, there's very little data on skill sets, digital skill sets, whether for demand or supply in Africa. I think we all have anecdotal evidence, but for all the pillars that contribute to digital economy, I think this is the one that I would probably say has the least information. And so, and this is one of the most important contributors to digital economy, and yet we have very little data. on the demand for digital skills and the supply of digital skills. I'll stop here.
One thing that I want to touch on with this is because I think that there are ways to kind of expedite a lot of the uptake of a lot of these skills. And, you know, I've looked into a lot is how did Silicon Valley really become Silicon Valley? And, you know, one of the things is that when the internet happened, you know, many years ago, it was kind of this unique thing in this area, and it drew people from around the world to Silicon Valley. And, you know, one company was started, and then maybe employee number 3 from that company would leave and start another company. And then employee number 5 would leave and start another company. And that's really what grew it. And it was kind of this bringing together, learning, and then growing from there. And I think that, you know, when we look at some of the emerging markets, there is that potential to learn from others and to collaborate. And, you know, previously it wouldn't be possible because there wasn't, you know, the ability to travel or to use the internet and to connect with people. But I think now there is. And so it's how can we not just, you know, build it on our own, but how can we say, hey, there's an entrepreneur doing something similar, maybe in China or in the US. How can they connect with a local entrepreneur, not for them to take over, but to share their skills and enable them to, you know, to learn the big data analytics or the machine learning, but then also implement it. So that way they can hire people and their company can grow. And I think that's how it'll really begin to build up the communities through these smaller companies. Because then, you know, employee number 3 will leave and start their own. Employee 5 will leave. And another point on this that I just want to point out while I'm on the topic, because I really believe in this, is that, you know, it's important in Nigeria or in Africa not to try to recreate Silicon Valley or Europe or China, but find what is really unique and special locally, because the rest of the world wants that and they want to see that. But it really has to be finding what's unique and doubling down on that.
Adia, I just love Karen's last point, and I just wanted to point out that one of the issues with developing a digital economy has always been about investment, and I hope we can do some, you know, deep digger on this one. But one of the key things that we've seen is the use of universal service funds. We did a research that showed that there were 37 universal service funds across Africa. At least 60% of those funds were active. But we realized that over $400 million of those funds are sitting unused. And we extrapolated in our research that could help to bring about 16 million women and girls online, and also give them the digital skills that they need. So this is funds that have been collected by various governments, which is the contributions from either utilities or telecom companies. And I think that is one place that we should also, as various countries, should be asking questions about how these funds are being used. And if possible, channel it towards people who need it the most. And in this particular sense, for me, you're looking at women and girls who are a very key component of the digital economy.
One thing I watched this bit from this entrepreneur in Nigeria yesterday, and she was saying that, you know, building up her business, you know, first off, she is, you know, kind of represents, you know, a good part of the population in Nigeria. And she was saying that, you know, yes, she did go and get funding. It was a tough process, but she did. But a lot of the funding, and I'm kind of bringing it back to our broadband conversation, most of the funding went just to paying for the internet and being able to keep the 20 employees online. It was like $1,000 a month or something, which is a lot of money. And so I think, yes, you know, it is important to make sure that there's funding for entrepreneurs. But I think also ensuring that they're able to use the funding for really what they need it for and what everyone wants them to use it for, which is hiring more people, growing their business, teaching and learning these new skills. But when most of the money has to go to broadband, you know, it's not going quite as far as I think it could be.
So it's going to broadband instead of investing in your tech stack and getting more tools that
exactly.
expose more opportunities and then allow space for entrepreneurs to leave and capitalize on those opportunities. So, I mean, that's an interesting trend that you pointed out, right? So there's just startups giving birth to other startup founders. And I've seen that happening to a small extent in the Nigerian ecosystem, but I definitely agree that it needs to happen a little bit more. So I want to move forward now, just because I really want to dig into the why, because I feel like when something is not happening in the way and at the rate it should, it's probably that there's a problem with incentives. So to that point, I want to spend this last part of our session talking about, government taxation, trust, and data privacy, which are all hot button topics. But to Eleanor's point, it's important that we have local perspectives on how we approach these things, as opposed to just cutting and pasting approaches from other places, right? So I'll start with government taxation. What are your thoughts on how, because I feel like there are many actors in government that are scared of stimulating a digital economy because they can't touch it. They can't necessarily go to the office. They can't go hold the person responsible in the way that they are used to functioning. What are your thoughts on ideas to express that taxation is still possible? Anybody can jump in, please.
Let me just, hello?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, let me just, taxation issues are obviously very controversial. If you're in the government side, you want more revenue. Up until now, the telecom sector has been a cash cow for most countries, most governments. Mobile sector, obviously, so many, there's been multitude of studies on overtaxation of the mobile sector. And it's that I haven't seen any consensus on how much taxes should be for the telecom or digital economy sector. But I think the couple things that I can, a couple inputs that I can provide is that, one, it is difficult because in the digital economy, it's a lot of intangible assets. And so it's very difficult to place a value. And governments are just used to hazarding, guessing, and then putting their own estimates, depending on how much revenue they want to raise. So I think it's really important to understand the digital economy sector, how it's valued, and how it's taxed. And increasingly, the number of studies that are coming, I think the EU is leading, the number of studies that are coming out on how to really tax. Nobody denies that there's that they need to be taxed. I mean, the sector is similar to every other sector that needs to be taxed. How it's taxed in Africa, for instance, I mean, in the mobile sector is where taxes are a little bit more. We have more data. You see, UK tax is probably about 16%. Latin America about 18%. Africa is anywhere from 30%. I think in Guinea, it's over 60%. So it's very inconsistent. It's not clear how we're taxing, the transparency of it. Increasingly, international connectivity has become a cash cow. So there are all these issues that need to be addressed to make taxation more transparent, more in line with international best practices. And I agree that things have to be homegrown, but there are also lessons to learn from in terms of how others have done it. So these are just my couple thoughts. And there obviously needs to be a lot of training for the tax authorities in terms of how to value the digital economy sector and perhaps what taxes are necessary.
What taxes are necessary? Yeah, I like
One
that.
thing, I was just going to say, really, I'm not too familiar with the taxation system and whatnot, but one thing I do think is important is that, with innovation and digitalization, it's creating transparency. And I think it's a transparency that never has been able, no one's ever been able to have before. But I think, not only is that going to really first off, it will create more money. It will create equality. And if there's one thing I've learned in my whole life is the importance of things being fair. And when things are feel fair, people are then able to kind of pursue their passions or really dive into what they want to do. And I think that being digital will create that transparency to enable, everyone to kind of have that feeling and the ability to contribute.
Okay, I think that's great.
To the discussion on taxation. So what we've seen evolve in West Africa is, first of all, we've been very traditional in the way we tax. So especially for places like Nigeria, we see issues that requires a harmonization of taxation. The federal government tax the operator, the local government will tax the state, like there's double taxation everywhere. And that hasn't helped because like Mavis was saying, once we discovered that this sector is a cash cow, we started overtaxing them, double taxation everywhere. And that's been an issue we've been crying out that you have to look at harmonizing the taxes. Eleanor can speak to that. And we're beginning to see some traction, but not where it should be. You need to harmonize. If not, you're going to make the private sector pull back investments. People don't like knowing that they have to pay to this local government for the same thing. Then the second thing I saw, which I also show some empathy for the government for, like, Mavis has also said, that's the way for them to make revenue. But with the entrance of the OTT player or the next phase we're going into, they are struggling because the traditional ways of taxing requires that you have a brick and mortar, there's a physical presence. But how are they going to tax Facebook for all their revenues from ads? How will they tax Google? Yeah. Sometimes they're not physically present in these countries. Do you go to the office in the US and tax them? How do you get the data? How are you sure which traffic passes for, it's so complicated for them because we have these arms of the government still very traditional in their approach and they haven't
use digital services. So how will we understand?
It was actually scary for a lot of them in the beginning. And I remember speaking to one of the regulators and I was talking to him that you have to learn to, rather than really keep tightening the existing part of the sector you understand, which is the mobile operators. So you keep taxing them more. Why don't you try and understand the new entrants and how the sector is evolving? Because that's the future. Very soon, when we are saying everybody's going to cloud, we're saying that literally, you probably don't need brick and mortars for most of these services. So how are you going to be able to get revenue? So you might have to rethink your traditional ways of taxing. Maybe if you cannot do it the traditional way of saying you pay this percentage for spectrum, maybe you can look for other collaborative ways to work with that sector. To say, I will need you to do this and this in my country or in this community as a way of giving back for getting revenues from this. We should start being open about how we discuss taxation because the traditional methods might not apply with the way the industry is growing.
Fantastic. I think one more thing I want to mention really fast is, and I don't want to kind of, make it sound simpler than it is, because I know it's a very complex issue. But, when you look at like a Facebook or a Google, these really are just tools to enable local businesses to sell more, to grow their business. And so, in my view, it's just to continue kind of taxing the local and looking at these as now they have these amazing tools to be able to sell to someone in another town or to be able to kind of grow that business locally. So I think that hopefully that's kind of the main goal, is to use it as tools.
And I think that, I was just listening to everyone's conversation about taxation. I was just smiling. But there's one point that we always need to realize, that taxation is not gender neutral. Taxation, yes, it's not gender neutral. It affects women in a much more different way than it does with other, with men. And we've done research on this. We looked at East Africa, the taxes that were slapped on social media in Tanzania, in Uganda. We looked at how it affected commerce, how it affected women's groups, the way they were able to interact as well. And we did realize that it had a negative impact, especially on women who interacted a lot more through social media. So as governments are looking at ways of taxing some of these new players, they are using the traditional and old methods, and that is also affecting the people who need these services the most in a very negative way. So in our conversations with governments, I do understand that they need to raise revenue. There's a lot of pressure on them, but this is one place where I feel that there needs to be more collaboration, better data as well, because when I said taxation was not gender neutral, people raise eyebrows. But the data shows we need to be looking at it from a point of look at what the research is showing, what data is showing, and come up with more innovative solutions on how to be able to generate revenue, but make sure that consumers are not negatively affected.
Okay, fantastic. Wow, I didn't expect taxation to actually generate this much excitement. And now I'm a little worried about bringing us up the last topic, which is data privacy, because I know we could easily go on for another hour on that, but I feel like that's another one that's really in need of a local context, right? Because, on one hand, if you photocopy the playbook from Europe and the US, Africa loses out in a much bigger way, in my opinion, right? Because we lose out on the infrastructure. Now, I'm not saying privacy is important, but I think that there are, in order to have digital economies play the role that we've seen in developed markets, as well as fill the gap from markets that are not deep enough, right? It needs oil, and the oil for the digital economy is data. So I wanted to throw it out to the panel as to what you think a local context for data privacy might look like.
I love this topic because I think it's a great topic because, right now in the US or in Europe, there's so many laws, like I can't get my health record from one place to the other. It's really complex. But in Africa, you don't have a lot of that. So you can start fresh, which is exciting because you have the new technologies that will enable a decentralized system and enable people to actually own their own data and utilize it for their own good, as well as just make life easier. And so I know there are those technologies. I think it's making sure, coming back to this broadband discussion, that making sure that the pieces are in place to enable those technologies to be built, because it is an exciting opportunity, to be honest.
Well, the question I always ask is that, is Africa ready for that? Is that really our key focus?
Yes.
Should we be doing?
Yes, 10 times.
Our main focus.
Yes.
I'll give you an example. We're trying to do an e-health solution for a client. And of course, we needed to make it cloud-based because it was for rural. It had to be really cheap and affordable. And if it was cloud-based, it was affordable. But then, of course, there was this issue of, we have to localize the content. That means we have to bring it down. We didn't have infrastructure. The cost of localizing it and getting a data center increased the pricing over how many percent. So it was no longer affordable. So, it just brings the issue back to, should we, because I think it should evolve in Africa. We don't have to take the playbook straight as we see it in advanced countries. We don't have infrastructure. So until you put the infrastructure, you have to find a middle ground. At least for now, nobody's going around driving, smart cars and self-driving cars are not a big thing. So maybe if we're not that advanced in that sense of how we consume those services, we should evolve it. We shouldn't be so, rigid to say we want to take the playbook and we must replicate the playbook.
Okay, so please allow me to just chime in on that point. Mavis, did you want to add something?
I was just going to say that, it's important to look at this issue as sort of the importance of data. And we know that even though I agree we need to evolve, it's a very important economic resource. Mm-hmm. If you look at data flows globally, it increased from 100 gigabit a day in 1992 to 45,000 gigabit per second in 2017, and it's growing exponentially. Africa is just tackling a very small fraction of it. This is big business. Mm-hmm. And so if we don't have the policies that promote trust, that protect privacy, it's very difficult to have consumers being comfortable to transact business online.
Okay, so just to try to round up now so that we can switch to the Q&A. Jane, to your point, I don't think we need to be talking about driverless cars yet, right? I think the company that I work for, like I said, would not have been able to issue 4 million loans without data. Somebody had to understand that even the data that exists today has value and is important, right? And the thing is, it's very difficult, let's say impossible, to create trustworthy digital systems if you cannot identify people. Your identity is data. Have we digitized identity in Nigeria? In 10 different places, sure. But we don't have a single digital repository, for that. So even for basic services, we'll still drive cars, no problem with that. But to actually create a credit backbone in this country, imagine if the central bank had not issued BVN. There would pretty much be no fintech. There would be no fintech sector in this country. That single data-driven act supported by the government has given birth to a new sector that has created opportunities across all the other sectors because it is one of those essential ones. But let me bring the conversation to a close. This conversation has been so enjoyable. We've eaten into our Q&A time. But there was one question I was going to ask that you guys have already started to answer, which is what would you ask each other to provide? So Eleanor, I think we want you to fix taxation. Karen, we want you to bring more investment. Jane, put broadband everywhere. And Mavis, please just tell the government what to do and how to enable the infrastructure, right? I'll be sitting in my house when you guys finish, we'll come and create the startups that take up all.
Roll it out, yeah.
Okay, so now I wanted to switch over to the Q&A. While we're waiting for questions to come in, like I mentioned, I'll share the link for this presentation in the chat here shortly. But one of the things that is in there for your reference would be the digital reports that we have spoken about today. It would be great if we continue to sort of educate ourselves on the opportunities. Okay, so please, if you have any questions, could you please put them in the chat. Uche, please, if you could help me just sort of identify any questions that are yet to be answered, I think that would be great. Hello, Uche, are you there?
I think I saw someone.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Okay, great. Yes, so there are a couple of questions on the chat, and somebody also wanted to ask questions. Mike wants to ask question, but is it possible for us to break, just take like a breather and have take messages and then take the questions to give people a little more time to also ask questions? Is that fine?
Can we do that for like 3 minutes?
Okay, because I was going to ask somebody like Ifani to speak about, to make comment on the conversation so far. Also ask the guys from Signal Alliance to make comment. So would that work for you?
No, sure. If that's what you want to do, that's cool. No problem.
Can we just continue?
Okay.
Can they ask now?
Yeah, let's go ahead, please. So while we're waiting for questions, take that commentary.
Okay, so let me hear from Mike wanted to ask a question, but I'm not sure. Okay, but Mike is not here anymore. So I think you should just continue.
No problem. Hi, Ifeanyi, are you there? I've just unmuted you. Ifeanyi Akosionu.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Yes, we can.
Actually, to be honest, I actually have nothing to say at the moment. This is such an enjoyable conversation. I actually didn't even want to break it at all. So I think for now, I'll leave my comments. I'll pass on my comments, and let's just continue to go on. I have a couple of questions that I'll type into the Q&A.
Well, since we've got you,
why don't you ask the question at once?
Cede the floor, please.
Okay, perfect. So I think I want to just maybe a question for Karen and maybe anyone else. So I'm very keen on this issue around sort of digital skills, right? So we have a big opportunity, a very rare opportunity that I think the COVID-19 situation has sort of just presented us. And if we are actually going to be able to leverage some of the improvements in infrastructure that we're seeing happening now to build a real digital economy, skills is going to be a very strong asset, a national asset, a continental asset. I'm looking to see if there are possibilities of actually having policies in place that enable skills transfers from maybe the more developed economies coming into Africa. Some of the skills that we are deploying or sort of we are training people on at the moment are very foundational and may not necessarily be able to help us compete going forward. So I'm wondering if there's some thinking behind a transfer of skills from, say, the more developed environments, coming into Africa. Maybe Karen can answer that, but I suspect it's something that Adia, you may also have a point or two on as well.
Okay, and let me also add my own question so that you can answer all of them together, if you don't mind. So I know that a lot of the conversation, a lot has been said in the conversations, and I'm just telling myself, I said I was going to ask you if you can be a lot more explicit on what you see as the opportunities that people can actually leverage.
Yeah, I'll kind of touch briefly then on, or if anyone else wants to.
Go ahead, Karen, please.
On anything. Yeah, so kind of touching on the COVID situation, to be honest, well, first off, I was actually supposed to visit Nigeria as well as a couple other places in March, and I had to cancel the trip because of the whole COVID situation. And obviously, I was very disappointed. But what the COVID situation has done is it's actually forced everyone to learn how to use Zoom. And, a lot of meetings that previously I wasn't able to get because people would say, okay, we'll have them when you meet in person, or when you come here, we can do that. Suddenly it was like, okay, well, you can't come here. So, let's move forward how we are without expecting, having these expectations. Let's do what we have with what we have. And so for me, it was actually fantastic because I think it really pushed a lot forward, and it really forced people to learn Zoom. And, to be honest, a lot of people I even know, they would just print out their emails or, didn't use computers as much as they should because they didn't really understand it. And so I think it's a great example of how it is difficult to force people to do anything, obviously. It has to be driven by that demand side. It has to be that need. And I think it starts from, the corporates seeing that need, and then also seeing the opportunity that they have, that by doing things a little bit differently, they'll be able to actually grow their business or make money. But you've got to try. And, there's the classic innovator's dilemma. If anyone, I suggest reading that book or kind of taking a look at maybe an article that talks about the innovator's dilemma in terms of, yes, maybe a company is doing well and innovating is going to maybe take it down a little bit, but it's the only way to get to the next level. So I think that transfer of skills that Ifeanyi was talking about is something that it has to be driven by each individual with that want to learn. And I know that want is there. So it's just providing that opportunity, that access, whether it be through collaboration or, physical innovation hubs, accelerators, it can come in many different ways.
I just wanted to add one more thing to Karen's conversation about and on the digital skills transfer. So, what you've been talking about is more on the individual level and what private sector players can do on their own. but I feel there's also a role for governments in here. And it starts from how they're also structuring their vision for the economy. So it comes through the broadband plans that they're developing, the demand, the areas on demand, the milestones that they have there, and what structures they have to support the private sector players, the ecosystems, and the incubators is very, very important. For instance, governments could provide affordable broadband to all the incubators, to all the ecosystem and accelerator hubs as a start. And that could itself be one area that could stimulate the kind of digital skills development and transfer that's needed. And then in addition to that, also protect the skills developers as well, those who need to patent their innovations and the like. So these are areas that governments can actually play a role in addition to seeing what the private sector itself is going to be able to do.
Yeah, and it's funny because I read all the reports online, and every government agency seems to have put out some great press release about the innovation or things, their plan of what to do. And, it's funny because down in, I think it was like South Africa, I reached out because I was like, oh, I see that you launched this big initiative. And she's like, well, we announced it, but, we still have to actually, do it. So I think there is that big gap around the world. It really is around the world in terms of, you know what you want to do, but you have to know why you want to do it and then how you want to do it. And those are the missing pieces, I think it was Simon Sinek, his famous speech where, you talk about the why, the what, and the why, the how, the what. And it seems like everyone has the what because you can see it around the world. The what is the cool piece, but it's the why and the how. And if you don't have the why, you're going to struggle with the how. And so I think those are the pieces that requires an ecosystem. It requires the openness to learn and trying something new or different. I think that many people, right now the world got to the place we are through silos or through different ways. But to take it to the next level, you've got to break those down, and you really have to say, okay, we understand we can't do it all ourselves. How can we actually collaborate? How can we, maybe something may not have the tangible effect, but it's going to have that ripple effect. And that ripple effect is actually the how to get to what we want. So yes, Eleanor, I 100%, I do think that the government and the internet issue is the bottom line of all of it, to be honest.
Karen, I'm just listening to you speak, and I wanted to say, when you talk about the why, because I'm thinking maybe is it the why? And maybe it's really the why, because we've seen that, like Eleanor, what you said, those innovation centers, the accelerator, we are seeing private sector actually sponsor those broadband for those places, rather than, the government do that. And we know that the government can give us scale. I'm not saying the private sector shouldn't do it, but they don't give us the scale we want to see. I've heard of, very laudable projects of having innovation centers in all the local governments in Nigeria. Can you beat that? If we do have that, that make, digital, like, what are we talking about? People can go to those innovation centers. They would acquire digital skills. We can have people do, remote work from there. There's all kinds of things. You could even offer digital services, e-government services from those centers. So it looks like we know what should be done. I don't know why we are not doing it, Karen, I'm reflecting on what you're saying.
Yeah, no, it's,
I have power to do it or what. I don't know, why are we not doing it?
So Jane, just to intervene a little bit. And I like the point you made about government, probably driving this, but we also have a lot of examples where government has taken a more proactive role and it hasn't worked. Ghana is a very typical case where a lot of the innovation centers that you're talking about, I think the government sponsored about 200 innovation centers. Okay. I can just confirm that almost none of them are being used effectively. Where the private sector is not actively engaged, I think the use of these innovation centers and the drive towards really meaningful digital economy, I think there's a big risk that citizens will not use a lot of the innovation ideas that government promotes.
And here's,
private sector leads.
I hear you.
Hello.
I think that oh, sorry. I definitely agree. And one of the things that we've seen is, a startup will inevitably not be as successful as they can be if they can't work with a corporate, because the corporate's going to be their business or their clients. So if they can't have those clients, and not just in Africa, but around the world, corporates struggle to work with startups or SMEs or entrepreneurs. And so what we've seen globally is that it is much easier for a corporate to connect with a startup that potentially has, experience or pilots under their belt. And that way that corporate can get those KPIs because, at the end of the day, the corporate is responsible. They sit around a table, say, what have you gotten from innovation or from sponsoring these hubs? And so if they can sit around the table and say, these are the KPIs we've achieved, it will help them also build their internal innovation muscle so that ideally they can then learn how to work with younger startups or SMEs. And that's what's going to create sustainable innovation. And without that piece, it has to be kind of a two-sided approach, not maybe multiple-sided. Having the corporates build that internal innovation muscle, understand that why. And to do that, you do have to connect with potentially global startups or startups that have experience. At the same time, then enabling the local entrepreneurs to build up those skills, have access to those innovation hubs. And the government, of course, plays a huge role. I mean, some of the examples, and I'll stop talking shortly, but, in Abu Dhabi, we actually partnered with the global economies, which is the government there, because they said, listen, we want to not only attract and be an innovation place globally to attract people, but we also want to build up local startups and enable corporates to have those collaborations. And so it was very successful. Actually, out of 10 startups, 4 of them ended up setting up shop in Abu Dhabi, hiring local people. And so it's just an example of how the government, they were that spur to enable the coming together of people.
So just
okay, Adia, there's some questions here, and I know Peter is also raising his hand.
Yeah,
so can I read out the question?
Yes,
can I read out the question before? Yes. Can I read out the question?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So DJ Comment says, how do you see increase in digitization in farming happening? Every donor I talk to is suggesting a platform where smallholder farmers can see which market offers the best price for their crop, which makes my skin coil. So that's one. Then Bradley says, one of the biggest challenges we are seeing in connecting the unconnected in rural communities is access to funding. The development of these rural networks, okay, especially when building mobile networks. As the operators say, the business case is a challenge. The World Bank is financing certain of these deals, but it does seem like there is a lack of capital, not a lack of demand for services. So perhaps Peter can ask his question and then they can take all of it together.
Okay, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, Peter, please go ahead.
Yes.
Okay, yes, my name is Peter. I'm the editor of techeconomy.ng. So thank you so much for this discussion and for the input so far and the suggestions made. I want to ask a question with regards TV white space. We know it's a kind of a resource that we've not, probably in Nigeria, we've not tapped into it. I know in Tanzania, they've used TV white space to launch solutions in rural areas, and they've seen the results. What do you think about this? Do you think that space or TV white space should be regulated, or it should just be made free and given to operators to launch services in rural areas? What do you think about that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Adia, please, before you go, let me add this last question, and everybody can take.
Actually,
some.
Uche, it's confusing to get I've forgotten all the other questions you mentioned. So I really think you should allow us take the questions one at a time, please. Because I can't remember the ones. Yeah.
It's fine.
Hi. So I just wanted, I saw the question about, I'd like to take the question about the investments. And one on, I believe, rural, it was on rural development. And I'm very happy that the person raised that question about rural development, and because often we're talking about the digital economy, but we also need to think about if we really want to attain universal access, then we need to look at our rural areas. And one of the key things that if we really want to go into rural areas, is to also look at complementary service providers, and that's where TV White Space also comes in. So it's not just about TV White Space in particular, but we should start looking at beyond the mobile network operators. We need to look at community networks. We need to look at new innovators coming up in this space, where we can actually set up in these rural communities in a much cheaper and efficient way. And one of the biggest bottlenecks to this has always been the issue of policy and also funding. And I think that is a place that we really need to be engaging governments and also other players, even particularly the telecom sector players, the big MNOs as well, so that they start seeing these complementary service providers as partners in this space in order to provide the connectivity that we need in the rural areas. I also wanted to talk about the investment. Someone mentioned that the World Bank was funding, the World Bank has funds, so I think I'll leave that for Mavis to deal with. But I just wanted to mention that just 1% of multilateral bank allocations is actually going into ICT infrastructure, just 1%. So there's a lot of opportunity there. When we looked at through the Digital Moonshot for Africa research that we did with the UN Broadband Commission, we realized that if there is a milestone by 2021, we need to bring online about 220 million Africans, and that will require an investment of about $9 billion. And so if we, and this can be done through a collaborative effort, through private sector, multilateral banks, through governments as well. So it goes back to the issue of partnerships and collaboration that Karen has been talking about, that there's a real opportunity for us in that space, and we really need to look at it more closely. But I'll defer to Mavis to speak about the opportunities from the bank.
Hi, Eleanor. Yeah, I think every country is very different. There are a number of countries that have projects with the bank that are looking at extending connectivity to the last mile, using universal service funds to address remaining gaps. But to a large extent, it's really looking at the broader issues of where are the market failures. And where there is proven market failure, that's where the bank likes to apply its funds. That where the private sector cannot or is not comfortable to go, or to go alone, is where the bank likes to apply its funds. And so, yes, funds are available, but I think it has some specific areas and not conditions, I hate to use the conditions, but specific criteria for applying those funds. But that said, I just wanted to also highlight some of the incentives for private sector to go into the rural areas. TV White Space, Eleanor mentioned, it's part of the the spectrum issues of providing incentives to the private sector to use unlicensed spectrum, for instance, in the rural areas. A lot of the issues also is really the licensing framework need to be updated to be a little bit more agile. So some of the countries are moving to unified licenses, which allows operators to use whatever technology that is affordable, that is cost effective to provide services in locations that they find there are gaps. So I think there's a lot that can be done. We already touched on the use of the universal service funds. A lot of the traditional use does not really meet the demands. It needs to be a little bit more innovative. Private sector will usually use the universal service funds they will not go to areas that they do not want to go, even with universal service funds. So we need to be a little bit more innovative to look at what is it that drives the private sector to go, and where it's absolutely not able to go, government obviously needs to step in. And that's where the bank has also supported, perhaps putting in funds to in universal service funds where the private sector funding is inadequate. So I think there are various ways of addressing the universal access gap, but mostly it's addressing competition issues, addressing licensing, spectrum issues, and then the effective use of the universal service fund.
Okay, if I could jump in to try to answer Bradley's question. I think that with the universal service funds supporting the mobile networks to go to rural areas, it touches on a couple of things that my other panelists have said. So it's not just putting the infrastructure there and having it be present. It has to be run. It has to be run on an ongoing basis, and it has to be utilized at a certain level continuously for it to continue to make sense. So beyond sort of the support possible for erecting the infrastructure, there's now the use cases, which speaks to Eleanor's point about complementarity. Right? What are the other things that need to be happening? Okay, so how is this broadband now used when it's in the village? So government does need to sort of supply the enabler and then allow people build the digital skill sets, build the companies that play a part, build the infrastructure to allow people to provide credit, build the agricultural platforms, all of which can be done on basic technology like USSD. So I think the other thing government can do, instead of talking about, skills transfer, is just to focus on these enablers. Is when they find companies that are solving the problems that they've been trying to solve, is support them, right? Because there's a lot of friction to doing business in Nigeria, which I think is sort of similar across all the other African countries. And a lot of this friction is created by the government, So I think these are ways to examine allowing innovation to bloom instead of squashing it.
And one thing, and very honest, oh yeah, sorry, one point, just kind of touching on some of the investments and, kind of looking for that outside investments from venture capital firm for the startups and whatnot. Just coming from that space and, knowing kind of a lot of the community is that, yes, as what we're doing, with policy, government, corporates, current innovators, at the same time, in parallel, it's so important that because like I said, perception sometimes is stronger than reality. And, if I just go right now and even Google Nigeria or something, the first thing that pops up is horrible, scary things about violence and all of that. And so I think that, all the work that we're doing in parallel, it's so important just to make sure that the best messages are being put forward, because that way it'll make it easier for people to say, okay, we want to go, we want to see what's there. Because it is kind of a fear from people around the world, and it's a perception that needs to be changed for people to see how actually innovative it is.
Let me just add to Bradley's question. So just speaking to what Adia said, so when the original operators came, so we call them the mobile operators, they were going home with very healthy margins, and that made sense for them. Now, if you're telling a company that makes almost 30%, 40% EBITDA to go to regions where the EBITDAs would be like 10 or 15, they traditionally wouldn't see any viability in doing that. So one of the things, like Brad is saying, is that they've shied away from investing in those places. We're looking for funds. But one interesting thing that has happened is that they're now willing to do new models. And that's what I want to speak to. If these operators are willing to go back, if the models are changed, then I think the government also needs to come to the party. Now we see the big operators willing to go back to those rural areas if they tweak it, like do like a revenue share. So risk reward or share the risk. But if they're going to change it, I think the government also has to change their approach and also the ways they have collaborated with the private sector. You know, traditionally we tax them for the equipment, we make them pay side, you know, all kinds of fees. But if it comes to rural, if it has to work, I'll take the case of what we did in Ghana. There has to be a partnership with the government. We probably have to give incentives to the private sector to go to those areas. If we have to give them tax breaks for equipment they purchase going to the area, if we have to take all the taxes and the levies we'll normally give them for site acquisition or whatever off, so that the business case is very viable for them to take that risk. That would actually help. At least we've seen a success case of that in Ghana. So that's another way to look at it, of going into those areas if you don't have access to funding.
Add one point about, as we're speaking about rural connectivity, I just wanted to mention that we launched a rural connectivity, rural broadband framework early part of this year in February. And I would really encourage everyone to take a look at that. It's on our website, but I'll drop the link here, the rural broadband connectivity framework. And it helps because it shows various elements that various stakeholders need to look at in order to enhance broadband connectivity in rural areas. And it looks at the issue of licensing, spectrum, digital skills. There's so many elements in there, and it's very rich, a very rich resource. And I believe that it's one step as a toolkit that will be very useful, not just to policymakers, but even to private sector players as well, on how we can collaborate effectively in order to bring all these people who are unconnected in rural areas, bring them online, and also help them to be part of the digital economy.
Adia, are we still here? So can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, so I can take over, or you're rounding up?
No, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a great it's been a great conversation. I've just been sitting here and I'm listening, and I mean, I think there's been a lot of insights dropped, in this conversation. And as we round up, as we make to round up the conversation, I would just ask that you allow me just talk about a couple of people that actually supports us to make this happen. I mean, it can be, I'm sure, I don't know if everyone understands there's a lot of work, and then there's funding that's required to make all of this happen. But a couple of companies make this happen. So I have somebody from Signal Alliance who will just talk to us in a few minutes, two minutes max, and then we'll round up. And let me just also say that this is the second session in the series. There is a third and there's a fourth. The next one is on the 26th of June, and then the last one in the series is on the 10th of July. So Tokosi. Nancy is somewhere here. So Nancy, I'll just allow you to talk about Signal Alliance for about 2 minutes, and then we can.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Oche. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Fantastic.
But
thank
your
you
video is off though.
Oh, okay. Let me turn this on. I don't know if everyone can see me now.
Sure.
Fantastic. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak here alongside this fantastic ladies. They have been so amazing. I have learned a whole lot from this session, more than you can ever imagine. So thank you so much. Before I start dabbling into so many things, let me just dive right into Signal Alliance, who we are and what we do. Okay, so Signal Alliance was founded in 1996 here in Lagos. We are an IT company that aids corporate organizations build the networks that connect voice and data across the enterprise. And since 1996, we have grown to be the leading technology integrators for corporate organizations here in Nigeria. We have experiences in enterprise technology services, from cloud technology, infrastructure and enterprise services, data and AI, IT services, managed and outsourced services, and enterprise software services. Over the years, we have also extended our services, and we have subsidiaries and affiliates in the renewable energy sector. We have health and technology, fintech, and enterprise resource planning. So in our over 2 decades, we have supported businesses across all and different verticals, basically to digitally transform their business and, be in tune and in line with what the world is talking about right now. We've basically helped them digitally transform their businesses by integration of technology services. And we do this in partnership with some global technology providers like Microsoft, Cisco, UiPath, Informatica, Fujitsu. We also have Trend Micro and CA Technologies, to mention just a few. So before I round up, I'd just like to talk about a few of the practices that we do at Signal Alliance. I'll just talk about 3 or 4, if I may. Okay, so the first I'll talk about is our modern workplace practice. Through our modern workplace practice, we help organizations undergo complete workplace transformation that enables them to thrive in the digital environment as we speak. They can get to work from anywhere at any time on any device, and this helps them improve their employee productivity, and this platform also creates a seamless communication and collaboration for these companies, and while doing this, while accessing all of these tools, we ensure that we maintain the security and the integrity of the company's systems and data. In the same practice, we also have experience and competence in offering support to deploy robotics process automation solutions for these companies, because basically the world is looking in the digital angle. So we're helping companies build their digital workforce to improve efficiency and competence. And the last I'll speak about, to save time, the last I'll speak about is our cloud services. We understand that right now, most companies don't think it's necessary, but we still try to ensure that we support businesses, transition into the cloud. Most of them still can't wrap their head around it. So we ensure that they're comfortable in the process. We make the process easy for them. And one more, if I may add one more, we have
Nancy, because of timing.
Okay. Because of time.
Yeah.
Because of time. Okay, let me just round up there. Thank you so much for everything. Thank you for your time, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you to your team from Signal Alliance for supporting this.
Thank you very much.
So we just have zip.com.ng, which is basically services. They provide services for creative services for businesses. It's another company supporting this. Then, of course, Veraki, Ifeanyi, and team. Ifeanyi, are you still around? Let's just do this in 1 minute, please. Ifeanyi, you're muted.
Thanks, Chair. I think essentially Veraki Partners is a technology advisory firm, right? So we play in the management consulting space. We've got essentially 3 strong verticals. So one is in technology, the other one is in services, and the last one is in venture building, right? So what we do in venture building essentially is to help very promising startups sort of get ready for the marketplace. So we sometimes connect them to markets, connect them to sort of mentorship, and make sure that they are sort of equipped and geared up to be able to scale. So that's what we essentially do in the venture space. In the technology space, we do a lot in sort of connecting corporate problems to technology solutions, right? So that's where a lot of the innovation that I think the panelists spoke about comes into play as well. And then, of course, in the services space, we do quite a number of industry shaping advisory support to government and to the private sector as well. I think let me leave it there for now, since we don't have a lot of time.
Thank you. Peter, are you still here? Thank you to your team from Tech Economy. Peter, are you still here?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Please, 1 minute. Let's just do this.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. My name is Peter Oluka. I'm the editor of TechEconomy.ng. TechEconomy.ng is a reputable online platform where you go for the news concerning, investments. We promote the startup ecosystem, mentors, investors, and everything that has to do with the ICT, broadband. So with 100,000 plus monthly readers, and outreach, the economy is a platform where you have opportunity to share with people in the ecosystem what you do. So you can reach out to us anytime you want, and we are supporting what StartupSouth is doing because we believe in the cause. We believe in the crusade they are pursuing, because broadband is live, and broadband is live to business today. So thank you so much, Uche, for this opportunity of being part of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you very much. Adia, please, in closing, I don't know, can we get all the panelists to just say their last words and then we'll round up?
No, I mean, I think we tried to close the session with that before. I mean, I think the panelists, demonstrated passion. I enjoyed the very exciting conversation, and I hope that people are taking away something that helps them make a better contribution to the digital economy tomorrow. I'll leave it to the panelists to decide if they want to say anything else.
Thank you for having me. It was quite an honor, and I loved meeting everyone, and let's all connect on LinkedIn after. So thank you.
Yeah. And just echoing Karen's words as well, I see that there is a request for email addresses, so I presume that I'll just leave that for Uche to do that for those participants who want to get in touch with us. But it's been an honor speaking on the same platform with all the very lovely ladies. Karen, I've learned a lot from everyone here, including some of the participants as well, the questions that you posed to us. So I'm really looking forward to more conversations on this going forward.
This is Mavis. Thank you. I'd like to echo what everybody's saying. Really enjoyed the conversation. Just like to finally conclude that digital economy opportunities are really real. I just started by saying that it's a $300 billion opportunity for Africa. It's just a fraction of the global opportunity of $11.5 trillion. So there's a lot of room for growth. The risk of being left behind is also really real. And I'd like to end with what John Chambers, the CEO of Cisco, said one time, that said at least 40% of all businesses will die in the next 10 years, if they don't figure out how to change their entire companies to accommodate new technologies. I think the same extends to governments, and we need to take this opportunity really seriously. Thank you.
Awesome.
I would end by saying that it was such an honor to be with all these wonderful ladies. And I just want to recap a comment I read in the chat box. Isn't it wonderful that we have an all-female panel discussing technology? I thought that was an excellent one. So thanks, Uche.
All right. Okay, I think we have everyone now. Thank you so much. I actually enjoyed the session, and I just like to mention that we have as in the audience a couple of officials, including people. She doesn't want me to mention her name, so I just mentioned including people from government actually, and then Bradley has been communicating a lot in the Bradley has been communicating in the chat. Bradley runs Neuron Wireless. Is a regional manager for Southeast, Middle East and Asia for Neuron Wireless. He was a panelist last 2 weeks, and he's here with us today. I want to beg that all of you are able to tune in for the next session 2 weeks from now, June 26th, which is on digital transformation. I hope that you can all join us in 2 weeks time. And until then, thank you so much for joining this conversation. I appreciate it.
Bye.
Okay, then bye.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Bye, Mavis. Bye, Uche.
Thank you, Adia. Thank you,
Karen.
Eleanor. Thank you, Jane.
It's a quick one. I hope the recording
Thank you.
is up. There have been a few requests for the recording, so I presume that it's going to be up soon. Uche?
Yes, we are recording. We're recording this, and it's already actually on our YouTube and Facebook Live pages.
Okay,
Yep.
that's good.
Okay.
Oh, my goodness.